Hello, I am Braden, another co-founder at Range. I'll invite our panelists up to the stage right now, and as they get seated, I'm kind of curious who we have here in this room. If you're a manager, could you raise your hand, please? Okay, a couple managers. If you are an individual contributor interested in being a manager, raise your hand. Okay, if you're an individual contributor not interested at all in management, raise your hand. Okay, a couple, that's fine. Hopefully, maybe this conversation will change your mind a little bit. Well, today I'm pretty excited because, managing I think is it's a lifelong challenge to figure out how we bring people together to build things that we can't build alone, and feel very honored to have such amazing people here on stage with us today. I'll let them each introduce themselves, talk a little bit about where you work now, but also really your journey into management. How did you get into management? Maybe starting at the end. Eugenia.
Hi, my name's Eugenia Dalton. I'm an engineering manager at Medium. There's actually a few people that used to be on my team at Medium in this room right now, so that's kind of cool. My journey into management started, I guess, around 2.5, almost 3 years ago at this point. I transitioned to being a manager in the spring of 2017. And at that point, I actually wasn't really managing anyone. I just kind of started going to the manager meetings and getting the context, and then starting out with one report. And I didn't actually start managing a team until kind of later that summer. So it was actually a pretty nice way to kind of ramp up into it and start understanding what it even meant to be a manager before taking on all the responsibilities all at once. So I definitely appreciated that kind of opportunity to be able to learn and not have to just, do it all on my first day. And I think this is also important just because it's almost impossible to understand what it even means to be a manager until you actually start doing the job. So I appreciated, that kind of trial period.
I'm Ryan. I work over at Facebook, mostly on Oculus, so in the AR/VR space. And I manage a team of about 25 people there now, across a couple different teams and with some other managers as well. I was thinking about, okay, when did my journey to manager start? Technically I can look at it, but really it started in college when I realized I wasn't that great of an engineer. And there were people around me that were better, and there was no way I was going to catch up with them. I was like, okay, but I like this space. What am I going to do long term? What do I start thinking about what I want to do? Then I went and was an engineer somewhere. It was a little startup with 8 people. The guy that invested in us didn't want to deal with all of us, so he's like, you manage those 2 people. I was like, okay, these are my 2 friends. I have no idea how to do that. So I failed at that. At the next job, I had an intern that reported to me. Following that, then I went somewhere else, and they were like, hey, we want you to come in and lead this space. It's 3 or 4 people. Eventually, you might manage them. Let's see how it goes. That was great because I kind of got to learn, hey, I know this space. I understand it. I'm really comfortable here. I know how to do this job really well. I think I can help these other people do the job better and represent them there. And then after that, I went over to, was just Oculus then, Facebook. And it was hey, you're going to manage this small team, and then have grown from there as kind of the team and the work has grown.
All right. Can you hear me?
I think so.
You might be muted.
I think I'm muted.
Switch on the top.
What about now? Sorry, hold on. No? Yeah? All right, thank you. That was my start to management. If I tell you how long I've been a manager, I'll be seen like a dinosaur. So I started my journey, I made my way all the way up to principal engineer a long time ago. And I joined this company, which I met a mentor, and he said, look, Rukmini, I think you're really good at something. You actually like people, and you're an engineer, and you interact really well with them, and you want to try management now? And I'm like, no, I'm not going to do it. I'm going to become obsolete technically, and nobody's going to want to hire me in future. This is not something I want to sign up for. So he gave me the safety net of trying it out, just like you mentioned, for 6 months. And he said, if you hate it, you can always go back. Well, I haven't gone back. I am currently on my 3rd VP role. I'm the VP of engineering at Abstract. I absolutely love what I do. I feel like people are what makes engineering fun. And to be there as a cheerleader, to watch people's journeys and cheer them on for the past decade or more has been amazing. So that's my story. Nice to meet you all.
Hey, I'm Shri. I am an engineering manager at Asana. I've been at Asana for 6 years, basically, but been a manager for almost one, just a little bit less than that. So I'm very much in the kind of beginning of my journey as a manager. When I graduated college and like got into the software engineering industry, I wanted to be a manager. That's what I said I wanted to do. I had no idea what that actually meant, but it sounded important, right? And so I pretty quickly realized there was a lot for me to learn, a lot for me to grow before maybe that was like the right choice for me in my career. And I think for quite a while in the middle there, I just did not want to be a manager. I was like, this is not. I want to continue to focus on my technical craft. I want to ship important features, that kind of thing. And over the last couple years, I ended up doing a lot less of the like writing code and shipping important technical features, and a lot more supporting other folks, especially through things like technical mentorship, but like project leadership and that kind of thing as well. And realized, let's say a couple years ago, that management is a way that I could really contribute to that and contribute to the organization and feel some kind of impact. I still had no idea what exactly management was like, and looking back, I'm not sure how I could have really known. I guess events like this would be pretty helpful there. So I kind of was like, well, I need to try it and see what it's like. And like Rukmini said, you can always go back. And that I kind of hadn't figured out. I thought it was like a permanent thing. But I tried it. I've been doing it for a year, and I kind of love it and want to keep doing it at least for the foreseeable future. So.
Yeah, I'm really interested in this decision to become a manager because I think more than any discipline, engineering, you can stay an individual contributor for longer and longer and still make more money, still have higher status in the organization. And in other disciplines, you really have to become a manager quite quickly. So there's a lot more freedom, I think, in engineering to choose to be a manager. I'm curious, why be a manager if you don't have to? Or how did you make the decision to be a manager, maybe? Anyone?
I get started.
Go for it.
For me, it was like I was doing the engineering work and I enjoyed that, but personally, I was like, sitting at a computer all day was not for me. And wow, people are really interesting problems, and they bring really complex things in, and suddenly you're working with your peers around you and all of that. So for me, that was kind of like, I kind of want to go focus on that aspect, and saw the potential to like up-level the team or the org or the work that I was doing by influencing others that way and helping them sort through things, more so than me writing more code or doing that kind of thing. I think I mentioned earlier, like, mediocre engineer, so I saw like that's where my strengths are. I should go leverage that, and I can do more that way.
I would have to say that like I probably didn't make the most informed choice when I moved into management because like I've been asked from like very early in my career by like most of my managers at some point like if I was interested in moving to engineering management. So I think that those engineers probably saw that potential in me and like kind of recognized something in me that like said to them that I would probably be good for this role. So I think that was encouraging to me, and I think that I just saw this as like another opportunity for growing my career at the time, and just like was an interesting path to explore and see if it was like a good fit. That was kind of how I approached the decision. But if I were to give advice to someone else who was trying to make this decision, I think a lot of it is like determined by what type of impact you want to have and like how you want to make that impact. Like if you're interested in shipping features and being involved in like architectural discussions, and like you can grow your influence in a lot of ways without actually being a manager. And like that means that probably the IC track is a better choice for you. I think that if you're interested in kind of scaling your impact and being like directly accountable for the success of an entire team or an entire org, and you're interested in doing that through kind of more programs or through coaching individuals, like helping set career plans, like it's hard to know if you like those things before you actually do that, but that's kind of the different type of impact that you can have as a manager, and a lot of it is just really about scaling that impact.
So we've touched on this theme a little bit about, there's writing code, and then there's all the stuff that happens with management. And, my background's in design, and so designers feel this a lot as well. I think it has to do with craft at some level, that you get really good at a particular craft, and then when you move to management, it feels like a loss at some level. Rukmini, you mentioned this as well, like kind of stepping away from the technical day-to-day. How do you think about that?
So for me, I feel like I'm still technically very involved. Like I'm involved in all the decisions that my team's making. I'm mostly the approver on most decisions that the engineering organization signs off. And I think I enjoy most mentoring really amazing engineers. Like I'm also a very mediocre engineer, so I think if you're a mediocre engineer, it's great to be a manager. You can tell people smarter than you what to do. That's not what it is. So for me, it was very similar. I think how I arrived to the decision was because I was in leadership my entire life, and I didn't even realize it. I was the president of my students' organization in the university. Ever since I'd known, I was like leading teams, and it kind of came naturally to me. And when I was given the opportunity, I was also very ill-informed. The most fascinating thing is programs are very predictable. Humans are not. And that's what I love about management. And it's a different kind of craft because you can give the same input, you're never going to get the same output, no matter how hard you try with humans. And it's fascinating. So I believe like you need the technical chops to be able to have conversations with your team. Your team will not respect you if they don't think you're technically capable. I think engineers are a really hard audience to manage. So for them to respect you, they need to respect your craft. So you never lose touch with your craft. Of course, I do not write code for everybody else's sanity and my sanity as well anymore. But
how about the rest of you? I'm curious if you've felt a sense of loss not being able to write code as much anymore.
Yeah, I think this is a pretty interesting one for me. The first several months of me being a manager were me like not knowing how to value myself now that I wasn't writing any code anymore.
Yeah.
It was very much like well, if I didn't write code, then was this day even worthwhile? Like, did I get anything done? And fortunately, it took a while, but I feel like I figured out eventually how to feel like I was creating value without, it being measured in lines of code or features shipped or whatever. But it was definitely like an interesting kind of like, I had to like shift the way that I was, mentally kind of valuing myself. Today, I wrote some code and I was so excited. It was a thrilling experience. And it also was a big struggle. So I don't write quite as much code anymore. But when I get the chance, and especially this week for Asana is actually like our annual kickoff week. So lots of people are in lots of meetings. We're not really trying to get that much done this week in terms of writing code. But somebody had something they needed somebody to do, and I was like, oh, I have a little bit of time. Let's try my hand at it. So, I have fun dabbling when I get the chance. I guess one other thing I'll add is that I have been at Asana for quite a long time, 6 years. So I happen to be managing a team where I'm the most experienced person in the room, and I kind of, the interesting thing about that is that the technical trust kind of comes for, I have that baseline to start with, right? Everybody sort of believes that I could get the job done if I needed to, which is kind of an interesting topic, yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting when you ship code or you create designs, you create these artifacts that feel very much like progress. It can feel very addictive to just create these artifacts, and they're so concrete. As a manager, you don't have that as much. You might create a presentation or do some perf feedback, but the artifacts don't feel the same, I assume. How do you get that kind of feedback to know you're being effective?
you ask for it.
What? You ask for the feedback? Yeah? Tell me more.
So I actually have a framework that I use for one-on-ones. And Abstract is a remote-first company. So I've had to flex muscles I didn't know existed in my body. It's like skiing for the first time. And for this past year, I realized that the way I was doing one-on-ones didn't scale in this remote-first concept. There's this incredible book called Fierce Conversations that I read many years ago by Amy Scott. And I picked up some questions. And the questions I would ask you if you report to me on a day-to-day basis is, first I ask you, what's the most important thing you and I should be talking about today? And that gives you space and the psychological safety to explore any topic. Right? It could be something personal going on, or it could just be like, somebody's blocked me on my PR and I'm pissed off, help me through it, like, you know. And I ask you questions like, what are you hoping I don't bring up?
Do you always ask those same two questions?
Actually, I have a framework published. I have like 10 questions, but I ask the same question every time for consistency. And for about 2 months, nobody says anything on the what are you hoping you don't bring up.
Yeah.
They're just checking me out, you know, they're evaluating me. And eventually people start to open up and I start hearing about, I get a pulse on my organization. And the last question I always ask is, what can I do better? And again, for the first 2 months, I don't get anything, nothing from anyone. And then it starts to come, and it keeps coming. And I think that's how you evaluate yourself as a manager. Like, if you've built an organization or a team where you're receiving feedback constantly, I feel that's a very good sign, because you've built a trust in where the team feels safe coming to you and exploring, you know, on how you can improve.
Yeah, similar thing. I tell anybody that new that reports to me, like, I'm going to ask you for feedback every single week. And it's going to be awkward because I'm going to save 5 minutes for that. And if you say nothing, then I'm going to ask even weirder questions until I get something out of you. And
What are some of those weird questions?
I'll just be like, okay, what feedback do you have for me? You know, things are good. I'm like, if I had a magic wand, what could I fix today? And then they'll say, like, well, there's no way you could ever do this, but I'd love to sit one desk over. I'm like, I'll move you right now. I'm so much happier. You know, like, you get these weird things and you have to tease it out of people. The other thing that I like to do for feedback is find managers that I interact with in the org that are aware of the work that I do that are very critical. So if somebody's just going to say good things, that's great. Maybe you ask them for your review later on. But I'll go and ask, hey, you're really critical and I value what you say. What am I screwing up as a manager, like from your perspective? And I often find that, like, yeah, this person doesn't report to me. They're not even in my org. We work together. Gives me the most actionable things, and people on my team immediately notice, like, hey, this thing that we were kind of chatting about on the side, you fixed that problem. Did somebody mention it to you? And I'm like, yeah, this other person somewhere else. So just constantly seeking that.
And how about you, Eugenia?
Yeah, so I guess like the way I define success for myself as a manager is kind of like how successful my team is at any given time, because like that is kind of my direct accountability, is like making the team as successful as possible. So as like a manager on like a product engineering team, I measure this in terms of like, is my team actually, you know, shipping? Are we shipping on time? Are we impacting metrics? Are we actually like having that positive impact? And then also like, are we operating well? Are people happy? Are they collaborating like in a healthy way, like proactively, et cetera? Like there's a lot of factors that go into a team being successful. And it's kind of my job to see like, okay, like maybe like if we do kind of, you know, take much longer to ship something than we thought, like it's my job to like diagnose that and understand why that happened. Maybe it's because two people didn't talk to each other, so then my job is to tell those two people to talk to each other, like those types of things. But ultimately, like if my team is successful, that means that I'm doing my job well. So that's kind of the ultimate kind of signal.
I want to plus one that. I believe in that as well. I run my organization via data. I use a lot of metrics, so I love Code Climate. I strongly encourage all engineering managers to use a tool that looks at your Git metrics so you can coach people in areas where they're lacking. I love Jira, sorry. I live and die by my dashboards. I know I keep a pulse on the items that are coming into the engineering organization, the items we're resolving. That's like the heartbeat of my organization. So on any given day, I wake up to saying, make sure the green is ahead of the red, otherwise, you know, I'm in trouble. So
I'm curious how the rest of you think about using metrics as a way to manage.
So I don't have much of like so I manage the first experience team, which is a very experiments-focused, a very A/B test-focused team. You know, we kind of own the first, like day 0 to day 31 of a user's experience with Asana. It's hard to make any kind of claim that like, oh, you shipped this experiment and it was a loss and therefore somebody's doing a bad job, because you know, sometimes what you're actually learning is users don't like this particular thing. I also find it hard to measure engineers' impact based on like how many lines of code they write or things like that. So I have a little bit of trouble with some of that kind of, like if it's too data driven, it can feel a little bit reductive. I do really think that you know, being able to understand the status of the work is pretty important. We use Asana for everything, right? Including, you know, project status, including, so you know, a project lead that I manage will say, actually this project is off track, you know, red status because we're blocked on this thing from another team. And that is a thing that I can often use to kind of debug issues, whether they're, you know, on the border between our team and a different one, or within the team, or things like that.
Oh, and to clarify what I was saying, I wasn't talking about like looking at metrics to like make sure that metrics are like always going up. That's definitely not the goal of shipping an experiment, but it's more like, are we shipping experiments? Are we learning? Like, are we actually incorporating those learnings? There's like a lot of things that go into like kind of operating well as a team, so.
I do want to add, I think it's just, again, dating how old I am. When I started my engineering journey, there was no metrics. And unfortunately, I was most of the times the only woman on the engineering team. And I felt like I had to code 10x more code just to have a seat at the table. So now that I'm in a position of power, I believe that I should set my team up for success. And it should be so transparent how many lines you're writing or what important features you're shipping, because that helps you get a seat at the table and you don't have to work extra hard. So for belonging and DE&I think it's really important to have data, but data without context is just purely dangerous. So do the one-on-ones, gather all the context, and then use the combination of the two to make yourself successful.
I want to go back a little bit when we were talking about the transition into management, and think a little bit about the expectations that you had about what management would be like. I assume it's like fame and glory, like executive washrooms, free snacks. For you, what was some of the surprising things that happened between like what you thought management would be like and then what it's actually like day to day?
I actually wasn't thinking about all of those things when I made the transition. I was actually more thinking about the things that I was scared of doing and wasn't sure that I would be capable of doing. So this includes things like providing really critical feedback when it's necessary, and course correcting, those types of things, or even going a step further, putting someone on a plan, having to let them go. All those things were terrifying to me as a manager, and I just wasn't sure if I was capable of doing them or what would happen. So I guess, I don't know if it's surprising, but those are things that I've all kind of had to encounter and actually do at this point. And as each one came up, it wasn't as bad as I made it out to be in my head. So I don't know if that's encouraging, but that's...
How about you, Ryan?
Yeah.
I think the surprising thing for me was when I was initially doing it, I felt like, okay, I'm in charge of these projects now, and not only am I going to make sure what gets done, but how it gets done. And I really need to, I've learned over time, focus on the what. Just because somebody doesn't do something the way that you would do it, doesn't mean that they're doing a bad job. And that was something that I really struggled to learn initially, because I would nitpick little things. I'm like, you should do it this way, or you should fix it that way. But the end result didn't really make a difference. So I think I've improved with that over time. I think the other surprise was I had no idea how many people problems would be coming to me. I guess I don't share a whole lot with my manager. I usually just keep my stuff to the side. But then suddenly you're looking at visa issues. Somebody's going through a divorce. Their cat passed away. And you're the first person they tell about that. And whoa, what does that mean? Okay, we're having a very different one-on-one. I was going to talk about this project because it's off track or it's going really well. We're shifting gears. Now it's here to support you and work on this. So that surprised me how much of my day job now is probably based on that side of things. Surprised me initially.
Do any of you feel like you have to set boundaries there between what people will bring and want help with and what you can actually help with as a manager? Eugenia?
Yeah, I think this was definitely a good learning for me, is you aren't your report's therapist. And I do think it's important to have those boundaries because like there's a lot of emotional labor involved in being a manager already. Like it's not healthy for you to like have to take on your like reports emotions as your own emotions like all the time. Like that's just not sustainable in the long term. And like I think a lot of managers burn out trying to do that. So I think actually like my manager shared an article with me like I think last year about like the difference between like cognitive empathy and effective empathy, where it's like effective empathy means you actually like feel the emotions with the other person, and cognitive empathy is where you understand why they feel that way, but you don't take the emotions on as your own. And I think it's important to understand that like a lot of times like people just want to be heard and they want to be understood, but it's not always healthy for you to also just take on those emotions because a lot of times it actually can amplify the situation and make it worse. Like it's good, like people just want to be able to say what they have to say, and a lot of times that's enough and they could just move on. And so, yeah, just don't try to be everyone's therapist because you just can't do it.
I give this advice to new managers. I've said it several times that other people's well-being is not your burden. Because you have to be empathetic. I actually ask for compassion because, you know, sometimes it's difficult to experience the same emotion, but you can try to do your best to alleviate some of the things. I'll give you an example. I had an engineer reporting to me who lost his partner. She was 27, and, you know, she was gone. And all I asked him was, what can I do to support you now? That was my only question. And his request was, give me so much work that I don't have to go home. And I'm like, you got it. And I'm like, let me know when you want to go back to your normal schedule. And that's huge, right? Because I didn't assume you needed something. I didn't assume that I go take time off. Like, because every human is different. So having compassion for that person, I did what I could to help him, you know, get that. The Dalai Lama, you know, describes compassion as when you see a person in a forest, empathy is actually, with a tree fallen on him, empathy is actually going and trying to put a tree on yourself. And compassion is just doing everything in your power to just remove that tree off the person's chest. So it helps.
I'm sort of also wondering, what's the best thing about management? We've been talking a lot about some of the hard things, the things that we didn't enjoy. What are those moments where you're just like, yeah, I love my job? Shri?
Yeah, that's a good one. I mean, and let's be clear, I do really love my job. It's interesting. So I manage the First Experience team, and I kind of inherited the First Experience team. They existed before I was their manager. I sort of started out managing a few of the people on the team, and then like now over the last several months, I've kind of, everybody's moved to report to me. But the cool thing is that the team feels so healthy. It has a culture that people point to across the organization and you know, say they want to be a part of. The team has so much energy and they're excited about the work that they're doing. And today we had our sort of half year, I guess, planning meeting. It's a big planning week, I mentioned that. And the energy in the room was electric, right? I didn't feel like I was driving any of that. I really was just able to sort of sit there and see it. I took notes in the meeting, and basically when I take notes, I cannot participate. And it was just so cool to see the team energized, really excited about the work that they're doing. And, you know, doing great work, not just being excited about it. So that's fun for me. That's where I get energy.
How about the rest of you?
For me, it's like when you're working with somebody for a while and you're coaching them and then seeing them conquer something they struggled with. I think the most obvious example is like somebody that's been working for a promotion for maybe a year, 2 years, 4 years. And when you get to tell them that they got it, like that's the most rewarding thing I think is like, hey, you've worked so hard on this and that's really rewarding. And you might have known for a little while, you can't wait to share the news. And then they're stoked and they run out and they go call their friends, right? But like you feel so good that it's like, this is something you've really struggled with and you've worked and you know, there's been coaching and you've struggled and seen them do that. On the more selfish side, it's when people tell you things like, you know, I didn't really enjoy this team, but now that you manage it, I want to be here forever. Or if you ever leave, take me with you. That feels pretty good because then like you're talking like, how do you know you're doing a good job as a manager? Hearing something like that, I'm like, well, I guess I'm doing something right. I feel lost every day, but that's the more selfish side of it.
Yeah, I think it's pretty similar for me too. Like getting someone promoted is like definitely one of the most rewarding experiences, especially if you've worked with them to like kind of even understand what that path looks like for them, like set those goals, actually work towards them over months or maybe even years, and then advocating for them, because like I do think that's also one of my really important responsibilities as a manager is to advocate for the people that report to me and tell the other people on like the panel like what their accomplishments are, like help them understand what impact this engineer has had, and then have other people recognize that and have that engineer like be recognized for that. It's just like definitely one of the best things. Another, I guess, fun thing is I was able to go on vacation for 3 weeks last year, and my team was like fine.
It's working.
Yeah, so it's really nice to like see my team just like be able to like execute and do well, know exactly what they're doing, and just like kill it, like even when I'm not there. That means like I set them up for success. So.
I had a team follow me around for 8 years across 2 companies. So that was pure joy, and I'll just tell a tiny story. While I was leaving this team was originally founded in Ukraine, and they spoke no English, and at that point I spoke no Ukrainian. So I ended up setting up English lessons for them every evening that they could go to. So my engineer number 1, Pasha, he learned English over the years, and last year when I was leaving that job, I went to say goodbye to them all the way to Ukraine. And they had this event in the evening where they called teenagers who were learning to code, and the event was done in both English and Ukrainian. So I had a translator. As I was speaking in English, she was translating in Ukrainian. So this young girl, she stands up and she's like, excuse me, how do you learn to speak English like that? And I looked at her and said, look, I don't have a fun story to tell you. I grew up in India. We were a British colony. I basically, maybe was born crying in English. And I said, however, Pasha's in the back of the room, and he's my first engineer here. If he would like to share his story with you on how he learned English, that would be great. At that moment, she turns towards him, and they both start giggling. And I'm like, hold on, do you guys know each other? And she said, that was my dad. And I just bawled. I cried because the opportunities I gave him actually changed the opportunities he was able to give his child. And that is the impact of leadership when done right with good intent. That's the impact you can have on somebody's life and opportunities. So I know the day-to-day gets really hard and you're always in the grind, but when I zoomed out and I looked at 8 years, Pasha, the software engineer who had gone to an architect and has his daughter who could speak perfect English. So I think that is an achievement.
So that's an amazing example of what a great manager is, giving people the opportunity like that. I realize that so many people kind of slide into being a manager without having those role models. I feel lucky enough in my career to have worked with people here and there where I can go, I don't want to be a manager like that. Oh, I do want to be a manager like that. But I think for a lot of people, we just draw what's around us in culture, what we see in TVs or movies or books, and we're like, that is what a leader should be. That's what I'm going to try to do in this organization. So I think it's helpful to talk a little bit about like, what is a good manager? How do we intentionally create that archetype of what is a manager we should strive to be? So maybe a way to frame that for you all is if you could create that archetype of like a manager that you look up to that has attributes and qualities and does certain things well, what would that archetype look like? It could just be a person you name too, that's fine. Yeah.
I'm like, I don't know if you should ask me first.
You look like you were going to say something.
Oh, I was just looking. I actually don't know if I have a great answer to this question because, like, I don't know. I feel like I've actually worked with, like, some pretty good managers over the years, but, like, none of them are exactly the same. So I don't know if there is, like, a perfect archetype. Like, I know people talk about, like, servant leadership and that type of model, but I also don't think that's perfect. Like,
what does servant leadership mean?
It's like your job as a leader to serve the team and like help empower them and like make them successful. It's not like a command and control structure where you're the one like telling them what to do. It's like you're there to serve them to then have them do everything. Anyway, but there's like, I don't know, like there's also times where like you legitimately just need to tell someone what needs to get done and that's also okay. So I don't know, maybe someone else has a better answer.
I can answer that. While I was interviewing for this role, my future manager asked me what are the 2 things I would need to be successful. And without hesitation, I said, have my back, because as a woman leader, it's hard, and get out of my way. That's what a great manager looks like. Like, you're brought in there to do your job, empower me to do my job. And the reason I said that to him is because for 8 years, I had an incredible manager who did exactly that for me, and I thrived under him, and I learned a lot of my leadership philosophies from him. So Kevin's been amazing. He's been doing that for me every day. So.
It's funny, I think when I was earlier in my career, the manager I looked up to is like, be the sword and shield, which is the same thing. Mm-hmm. If somebody comes to you saying they want something, go fight for it. And when they're getting pounded on, hold the shield up. Mm-hmm. Like, so when things are off the rails and somebody's coming after somebody, you go step in front, right? Like that's your job, and they're going to really appreciate you for that. But when they want something, you have to be the one going and chasing people down. I think that's like the simple thing. Another piece of advice I got there was like, say hi to people every day. Like a lot of people, like a lot of managers don't do that. And even just having that, hey, how's it going, good morning, can mean a lot. And I think what I've learned is there's no perfect manager, right? But you can get traits from a lot of different people and it's like, oh, I can improve on that or that kind of thing. So I don't know.
What are some of those traits?
I mean, I think that's where it's like, oh, I really like that. Go say hi to people. Yeah. And I was like, wow, that actually makes a big difference in somebody's face because like, my manager cares about me. And they at least say hello. They're not just like walking in and they go by with their headphones on and do that, and then they walk out later. But like, I feel like I have a little bit of a connection with them. One thing, like I was saying, when they're getting poured on, you go and you help them out. So I think that, you pick up that. The other one was like holding people accountable. I think was one that I really struggled with initially. Like, your job is actually to give them feedback because they want to improve and they want to get better. And if you're not, it kind of feels like you don't care about them. So I just feel like I don't know, constantly improving, but you pick up little things and you build that skill and you flex that muscle more, and then it's like, okay, but I'm slacking over here. Go work on that.
How about you, Shri?
Yeah, I think that's +1 to all of the things all these great people have said. I think the have your back thing is interesting because I feel like it needs to be. There's obviously a lot of nuance there, but a thing that I think is really important is for a manager to be able to both hold the short and medium term view and also the long term view in mind, because it's not just about how can you ship this project on time or the super tactical kinds of things, but also like how can I set you up for your for you to have a successful career that you enjoy, that is fulfilling, right? Whether that's working with folks to come up with career plans, right? Being able to kind of think strategic in that way and set people up to know sort of for themselves what they want to do. I think that's really important.
So I wanted to flip a little bit to some common mistakes that people make as well. I'm fascinated by both patterns and anti-patterns, in general pattern language, pattern thinking. In the world of design, a great anti-pattern is the perfectionist. This is the person who holds their design really close and doesn't want to share it with anyone for fear that that someone will poke a hole in it. And by doing that, they never get better ideas from other people. They never get consensus and get people excited about their idea, and then they're never successful. So that's a common anti-pattern that when I see it in someone as a manager, I can go, oh, like, here's my toolbox to go help them with that stuff. For you as a manager, I'm curious if you've seen kind of management anti-patterns, maybe stuff that you've fallen into. I mean, I fall into the perfectionist stuff sometime, and I catch myself and then can do it. Or stuff that you've seen in other people where you're like, they just have it wrong, and they need to unlock this thing to get out of that funk. Like, what are some of those anti-patterns?
I could go first. I think I have two anti-patterns that I notice very commonly. One is, if you're a new manager, you hesitate to ask for help when you're stuck. You raise your hand when, it's hard because you have imposter syndrome and you feel like now that you're manager, you should know everything and you should get everything right. So I notice a lot of people hesitating to ask for help. Hence my question, what are you hoping I don't bring up? And I also ask managers question like, who are your strongest team players? What are you doing to support them? And who are your weakest and what are you doing to help coach them, level them up? So that brings out some of this, but I notice a lot of they hesitate to raise their hand and ask for help. The other pattern I notice is we talk about giving feedback a lot, but receiving feedback is really hard, especially when you're in a position of power as a manager, because your insides will want to flee, and we're all taught that performance is kind of binary, either you're good or not, and it's very hard when you get it as a manager. So I noticed these, and even I struggled with it a lot in my early years. So I would say these are the two anti-patterns I noticed.
I have one, which I used to do a lot, and I still catch myself doing, which is I feel like the first thing I did, or the first questions I ever got from my reports when I was a manager, I felt like I had to know the answer, right? You are looked to as this sort of authority figure, right? And I felt like, whether it was a question about compensation or something technical, or, how does the org think about career, skills and success guides and things like that, I felt like I had to know everything. And I mean, it's been, a little bit of a battle to kind of unweave myself from that story, and being able to actually say honestly in a one-on-one with a report, I don't really know, but I will get back to you, or we can learn more together about this. I feel like is pretty important.
Yeah, I think one for me is definitely like an pattern is like not letting go, I guess. But also specifically, I think like my kind of instinct as a manager is often to like try to fill gaps, which I think is an important responsibility to have. Like a lot of times in order to make a team successful, you do kind of need to fill gaps and do the things that a lot of other people like don't necessarily want to do, or could distract them from their day-to-day work, and like kind of just like a one-off thing that just like needs to happen. Like a lot of times the manager just jumps in and does that. But I think it's, at least for me, it's very tempting to like almost take that too far and like take ownership over like too many things, and always feel like I'm the one that needs to like, answer a question when someone asks a question to our team on Slack, like kind of just like doing everything for the team so they can stay focused, which is like, first of all, it can be overwhelming, and second of all, it makes it so the team isn't learning how to do those things for themselves as well, so it's kind of like robbing them of that opportunity. So that's definitely something that I've had to like pull myself back from personally.
Do you want to share? I can.
Yeah, maybe it's a little different.
Yeah.
I'll try to keep it quick. I think one that I struggled with a lot when I was becoming a manager, I felt like it was my job to make people successful. Some people aren't going to be. And I felt like it was my job to coach this person up and get them into a successful state, but it wasn't working out. And I was investing way too much time trying to coach this person up. They were dragging the team down, and I made the mistake. Like, I should have let that person go earlier. And that sounds super harsh, but then you realize afterwards, like, wait a minute, the team's more effective. This role just wasn't working out. And I've seen that a lot, especially in younger managers, where they feel like, no, I need to cover for this person and do this and do that. And I'm like, wow, you're spending 2 to 3 hours a day covering for somebody and trying to do their job. You're not spending it on the top performers that you have and trying to coach them up, and they're losing out on opportunity.
Well, thank you. I want to turn it over to the room here to ask some questions. So as you're all kind of like thinking about what question that you want to ask, maybe I'll ask the first one, just give you a second. So I was reading Twitter last night, as I typically do at like 11:30 when I can't sleep. And Mia Bloom had this great tweet. She's a designer who mentors managers in particular. She said, if you have an IC with over 3 reports, or sorry, if you have a new manager with over 3 reports and you're also asking them to do IC work, you're setting them up to fail. And of course, Twitter is a bombastic place, but I thought I'd bring that idea in here and think a little bit about it. It just struck me that becoming a new manager is so hard, managing IC work and management is hard, and you've just now combined 2 very hard things for people, and yet it's one of the most common ways into management. How do you support people through that, or do you just try to avoid it?
I think it's a great way to get into it, but I think being very aware of how many people, and then the other thing is making sure that the work that those people that report to them is pretty directly aligned, so that they're doing minimal context switching. So either same project or very similar space helps. Somebody gave me a rough rubric one time of like each person that reports to them is 10% of their time. So if they have 40% of their time managing, I think that 10% is probably too low, because you don't know what kind of issues are going to pop up. That suddenly might take their whole day, and then they're slipping on their goals and that kind of thing. But that was why I think I did a decent job, or why I enjoy going into managers. Like, oh, you have 3 or 4 people in your area and your space, and you can like learn the management skills while you can still fall back on your IC. Like you can still feel confident in what you're doing as an IC while you're developing some of those basic manager skills that you didn't know what you really signed up for.
So you have your base and then you have your edge that you're growing on. Interesting. I'm curious if other people try to avoid it or if that's like essentially how you see it.
Yeah, I think that just others, but I think that there's like a timeline to it where for some people it's not going to take. The managers, they're either not going to enjoy it or it's just not really working out. They're not developing those skills. So I think having that conversation to be able to say like, maybe this isn't for you, or let's figure out why, or what's the gap in that kind of thing.
Maybe I'll take that moment to turn it over to the room. If you have a question, raise your hand. And I think Michael has a giant orange box that maybe has a microphone in it. That's amazing. Go ahead.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yeah, we can.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. Hi. My question is, can you speak to a big failure that you had as a manager and how you overcame it? So like, for example, you go through performance review and you get marked as low, and then you were put on a PIP, and I don't know, this is just a made-up example, but how did you come back from and then move back into performing as a solid manager?
I can go. I've had plenty of failures. One I can remember, I think that changed the way I did my one-on-one style was I had this engineer who was just not, he was not performing, and his code was just lacking over and over again, and I didn't actually spend the time to get to understand what the deeper problem was, and this was a long time ago, and I just realized, you know what, I need to put him on a PIP. And the conversation I was having with him during the PIP, I presented the PIP and he just broke down in tears. It was very scary. It was horrifying to be in that room, see another human break down emotionally. And then somehow I said, okay, reach into my human side and just ask him what's going on. And I asked him what was going on, and he described to me like an extremely personal situation that was actually happening to him in his life where he couldn't even focus on his work. And I felt like a total failure that day because I made no attempt prior to that point to understand this person and his story to kind of figure out why he was lacking. I just assumed that he's not a good engineer. So yeah, not proud of it, but I've learned a lot from it.
Yeah, mine is, I guess, somewhat related too. So like, I think one of the hardest things you have to do as a manager is actually hiring. Like, hiring is its like own thing that could be its own topic for a whole another hour, but it's really difficult, and it's impossible to get right 100% of the time. And I think I definitely made a mistake. I guess last year, the team was growing really quickly. I really wanted to hire really quickly, and I definitely kind of, you take some chances on people, which I think is the right thing to do. Like, you have to take chances on people. But then I think I waited too long to set very explicit expectations with this person about like what it meant to be like a senior software engineer and like what were the expectations for someone at their level and their role, and they just like were not meeting those expectations. And so yeah, it was similar where it was like kind of after they've been in the company for 6 months, I felt really bad. I felt I should have set these expectations and given them feedback on this like way earlier, but then it was still my responsibility to actually like kind of deal with the situation, and you kind of just need to like do it at that point. Even if it's too late, it's your responsibility to do it. So, like sat down with them, made it very explicit, like where they were, not meeting those goals, gave them that feedback consistently for like a few one-on-ones, and then eventually it turned into a PIP, and then eventually had to let them go. But that is also a big part of your responsibility as a manager. So it's important to take accountability for that.
Let's go to another question.
Hi. So my question is, so I'm a new manager on the team. The team is quite large, and so my manager still manages like half the team, and I have like the other half basically. So she is sort of the like manager that everyone knows on the team. And now I'm going from an IC to being a new manager on that same team. Have you guys dealt with this before? Like, how do you manage that expectation with the rest of the team? And like, this is all about going from an IC to a manager, and I would love to know just like the interpersonal relationship with you and the other manager on the team, or with the people that used to be your peers, like just navigating that path.
That's tough because it's awkward. It's awkward. I mean, like, I think you need to make sure that you and is it your manager, like do you have a really good, clear, open working relationship? So you can bring up anything, and it can be like, somebody that reports to me is not meeting, or we need this here, and really make sure that you're aligned on what the goals are and what your group of people is responsible for. That's where I've seen it really get confusing, is people across like, oh, well, I told my manager this, but peer over here is working on a similar thing. And the communication breakdown, I think, is like the thing to really make sure that you get right, because that will solve a lot of problems ahead of time, versus kind of like, oh, it all seems good, my group's got it good. I think that's the one area that I would focus on, is making sure that you have that good communication channels between you and the manager, and then amongst that team, get the stuff out there visible so everybody sees what's going on.
All right. Other questions?
Thank you. Well, I can speak loud enough. I actually wanted to follow up on that question, because I think one perspective of that question is like the perception of the people who used to report to the same manager that you used to report to. Now they have to still accept that their previous manager is their boss of boss now. So, and I mean, that's kind of, I think the most awkward part comes from their perspective, and that guy still is around. So they can easily bridge you because they used to, and now you basically and he actually can do that the same thing too, right? He can actually bridge you and talk to those people and basically put you down by doing that, and unintentionally. And if that happens, what do you do?
I can follow up on that. I mean, I went through that in one case in my experience, where I had to go to that other manager and say, you're not, like, you can say, like, you need to stop going and giving them work directly. And like, I had to give that person that feedback, because I said, suddenly, like, you outrank me in the org, right? So the minute you even suggest an idea to somebody that reports to me, they just assume that's what they should be working on right away. And like, we had to figure out that working relationship for how can you reprioritize what we're working on overall on the team, but I'm aware of that kind of thing, and you don't just walk by somebody's desk and be like, oh, I'm curious about something, and then suddenly they spent the whole week working on that. On the other side of that, where I brought in a new manager for people that used to report to me, it's making sure that I have that really open conversation with those people that are going to report to this person, talk to them why I think that there's a benefit for them to be managed by this person. Usually it's, I don't have enough time anymore, I have too many direct reports. This person's going to support you better. They're going to be more involved in what you're doing, or this is what they're going to be able to provide. But you know me, we worked together for a while. Hit me up any single time if you have any feedback about how the transition's going. What is that person not doing well? What are they doing better, so I can get that, be like, really making sure that like they have the ability to check in and like explain why you think it's better for them and what it means to them, but also being aware of like, what questions do you have? Not just like, this is your new manager, go, but hey, we're thinking about this, like, what are your concerns? How do we talk about that?
I don't step on a drama triangle, so that's what it's called.
How do you avoid it?
I actually honestly tell the two parties that are coming to me that I think you should have this conversation with each other, and I will not take the conversation back. I will even refuse to listen to the person who's reporting to me. If they come to me about their peers from the past, I'll be like, you need to go directly to that person, and you need to say this to them in the best possible format. Do not triangulate. Do not step on the drama triangle, because you can't do your work.
I have the mic. Can I ask another question?
Let's give other people a chance. Maybe can you just toss it to some people behind you? I mean, maybe physical?
Oh my God.
Well, I thought it was soft. It made a pretty big thump.
It does not look soft.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing so exciting experience. Thank you very much. I have a question. Do you have any leadership program in your company which help engineers to grow as a leader? If yes, how it works?
Yes, we do. I actually went through this type of program at my company before I switched into management, which I definitely think was helpful, and I think also was kind of like a signal from the company that they thought I had potential to go into management. And like, are you asking like what specifically they teach in these types of programs, or like how people end up in the programs, or like, I guess, what are you most interested in?
How it works, I mean, what skills you can improve, how can I take participation in it? Or if I a young manager and I want to work in your company and to have a transition, how I can grow as a leader in the future.
Yeah, I think a lot of it is going to vary company by company. Like the way it works in my company is that like your manager is the one who would nominate you to enter into this leadership program because like they know that this is something that would help you in your career, or because it's something you're particularly interested in, or because like you're kind of ready for it. Like for example, like we do Code 2040 internships for the summer. So like the intern hosts are often people who go through this leadership program in preparation for that. In terms of like what we teach, it actually kind of changes almost every time we do it. I'm actually going to doing one pretty soon that's like middle path training. So a lot of that is around like, I think we often form like false dichotomies of choice when we're like working. Like it feels like, okay, like either I have to do this or do this, and neither of them are ideal. And this is kind of about like training you to figure out like, okay, what is the quote unquote middle path, and like how can you actually find something that can satisfy both like, for example, like the needs of the company and the needs of the individual, those types of things. We also had like a program on like time management, which I thought was actually really useful. Things like that, like time management and prioritization.
Let's do one last question from the audience here. I'm going to delegate to Michael to figure out who gets this last question.
Don't throw it.
Oh, good catch.
Or do, as long as you catch it.
What are some of your strategies and learnings around managing compensation?
Oh, man.
Need an hour for that.
There was definitely need an hour for that. But like the question earlier around like what are some mistakes I've made, I was going to bring up this compensation story. Compensation is like a hard thing to talk about, right? It feels scary for sure. And there's all sorts of like, reasons why it should feel a little bit scary, right? People, implicitly, right, kind of value their own contribution to the company based on how they're being paid, right? The way Asana thinks about compensation is that it should be, correlated with impact, right? And another problem is like, what if you compensate, you make a compensation change before somebody has actually demonstrated increased impact? You can't take that back, right? There's like a loss aversion around it. It feels really tricky. So there's kind of a lot of, I feel like you have to do a lot of tiptoeing. I think it's really important to be really clear. In my story of where I screwed up, I had a report who was asking what do I need to do to get a raise, right? And I of course being a new manager, having very little comfort talking about compensation, I kind of was super vague. I said, I don't know, keep doing this thing that you're doing and do it well, right? Something stupid like that. 3 months later, next time there was a comp review cycle, and we used to do them quarterly. I think we now do them every 6 months. The same report asked again, so where's my raise? I did what you asked. And the thing that I did not do very well was make it clear exactly what my expectations were, exactly what their expectations should be, right? It was not the case that I would, if they checked that box and shipped that feature on time, that they would automatically get a raise, nor should I have made it seem that way. Do y'all have things to add?
Varies on where you're working too, I think. I've worked at small companies where I was managing, and they're like, you have this many people, you get this much money to dole out in raises or bonuses, right? And then it's up to you to fill out a spreadsheet or work with your manager on that. Worked at bigger companies where it's all formulaic and it's done, and I have zero involvement beyond I do the performance review, that goes off, and then all these formulas magically calculate everything. I love that as a manager, because then compensation is not while I'm managing performance and doing that, the actual dollars and cents is not something in my purview. You still have to answer questions around it, but often then I'm you should go to the compensation training and understand how this all works.
I actually believe in transparency about compensation. So I publish all the engineering salary bands to all the engineers. And it's a very radical, different way of thinking, but I think everybody should have that seat at the table. And I follow that up with a very clear career matrix. I learned from earlier mistakes too. So the minute I join any new company, the first thing I do is I put together a career map. And I'll give you analogies that most people can understand. I'll say you're a level 1 engineer, then maybe we'll put sunscreen on you, give you a hat, give you a trail map, and check in on you every half a mile to ensure you're staying on the trail. And if you're a principal engineer, the expectation is I give you a knife and you get out in the mountains and come back with a trail map for everybody else. But essentially, under this analogy is a detailed description of what I expect from you from a supervision standpoint. What's the discretion? So if you fail, what's the impact to the business? What are the soft skills I'm looking for at every level? What are the technical skills I'm looking for every level? What is the interaction you expect to have at every level? So it's very clearly defined. So once you do that homework and you have like transparency in your salary bands, it's still not easy, it still sucks, but it makes it less painful.
Okay, last question from me, for everyone on the panel. What is one resource that's helped you along the way? It could be a book, could be a talk you saw, could be a community you've joined, but a resource that's helped you.
Yeah, I really enjoyed reading The Manager's Path. I feel like it's out there, like a lot of people know about this already, but I actually especially like that it kind of followed my trajectory as a manager. Like it starts out like literally as an IC, then being a tech lead, then being a manager of just like one person, then managing a team, managing multiple teams, managing managers, like, and basically like you don't even have to read the whole book when you first start out. I just kind of like read the next chapter whenever I'm like transitioning into that stage. So that's been pretty helpful. I'm also part of this like Eng Managers like Slack group where people just like ask for advice or just like kind of post articles and stuff. And like I'm mostly a lurker, but it's like a good community to be a part of. So
It might be that same community. This guy, Michael Lopp, Rands. He writes a ton of great blog posts. I've learned a lot from that. I read a lot of books on this stuff in general because I'm like, I like this stuff. So I enjoy reading about it, but I don't try to say like, oh, this book has the Bible on everything. I'm like, I'm going to learn one interesting thing from this book and try and apply it from there. But I really recommend Rands, his blog, getting in the leadership Slack because people just talk about questions and things like that. It's a great resource.
I have 3 books, I think, that mirror my career progression. In the early years, I was a huge fan of 5 Dysfunctions of a Team. It's still gold. Like you go back and you can see that triangle. And I made my way, I think, through the middle years of leadership in With Radical Candor. I used to swear by that. And my new favorite is Dare to Lead by Brené Brown. I love that woman. She's incredible. And she talks about shame and vulnerability and all these messy feelings that we as leaders try to shy away from. And I love Medium. Plug for you. It's incredible. I spend 15 minutes a day reading articles, leadership articles on Medium.
So I think one that, +1 to Manager's Path, but I think there's a lot of great books out there. I think one that I've read recently that I really, really enjoyed was, it's called An Elegant Puzzle by Will Larson, I think is his name. I think he's pretty well known. He just moved to be CTO somewhere, I don't remember. But it's really just like chock full about, where? There you go. It's chock full of like lots of interesting just tidbits about how to think about management problems and challenges. The other thing I will say, which is not a physical resource or virtual, but one of the things that has been most useful for me as a new and growing manager is my peer managers. So much being able to learn from them, rely on them, talk through challenges I'm facing with them has been a really great source of learning and of growth for me.
I just want to add a plug to the peer management. Not everybody might have a circle of peer managers. So if you find yourself in that situation, I'm also a huge fan of Plato. They're an engineering management community. You can go there and you can sign up to speak to a mentor every week. So if you are not in a huge organization, that may be super helpful as well.
Thank you all. This is definitely my moment of gratitude. Thank you all for coming to this portion. We're going to switch over to another activity right next. I also wanted to be thankful for Bloomberg Beta, who lent us the space. They're one of our investors, and they're amazing. If you are thinking of starting a startup or looking for another round, go talk to them. If you need an intro, come talk to us. And please help me in thanking our panelists. Like, one of the things I love about this community is how people are willing to give their time and help other people along the way. It's why I love technology. So huge thanks to our panelists. Thank you.